Good morning and welcome to this wonderful building, the MAC, and to this, our first Trust Foundations Symposium for the Arts in Northern Ireland. I think I probably know most people in the room today, but for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mary Traynor-Gelly and I'm the Chief Executive of Arts and Business Northern Ireland. Arts and Business is truly delighted to be working on this event in association with the Association of Charitable Foundations, ACF. And that is generally funded by the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, so we're delighted to have that support. We're also really thrilled that so many of you have joined us here today, and particularly delighted to have 10 trusts and foundations here, 5 of which who have travelled over from London and other parts of the UK, so we really do appreciate you taking the time to do that. I think it's probably worth me just taking the time to list who we've got here. BBC Children in Need, BBC Performing Arts Fund, Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, the Gerwood Charitable Foundation, Lloyd's TSB Foundation, Paul Hamlin Foundation, Ulster Garden Villages, Wolfson Foundation and Fermanagh Trust. So it's quite an impressive list, I hope you'll agree. I'd also like to thank James McGowan from SEF for all his work in making sure we've had such a good representation from the Trust today. So what's today all about? Well really, it's ultimately about an exchange of information between the Trust themselves and you as leaders in the cultural sector and the arts in Northern Ireland. And really, ultimately, it's to see about how we can collectively work together to increase the income from the Trusts and Foundations in Northern Ireland. We have a really unique opportunity today to hear directly from the Trust themselves and get their advice on what they're seeking from the applications that we make, and also to get their advice on how we can increase our success rate for the applications that you do make, because I know how much huge amount of time that it takes to pull together an application. But hopefully, and importantly as well, the Trust will get a chance to hear from you, the people that are at the coalface in trying to get this funding, and hear your experience in doing that, and also any challenges that you think that you'll have. So we really do want a dialogue, and we hope that you will participate. I know you're not shy, so I can rely on you to do that. I think all of us in the room know that the arts generally have never been immune to being financially resilient. That's kind of what we do and have done for many years. But particularly in these times with public sector cuts, there is increased pressure on all of us to diversify our income. And I know many of you are already doing that absolutely brilliantly. But I think it's also important for me, from Arts and Business, to sort of highlight that we've also always advocated that private investment can never replace public, nor should it. And the two really very much have to go hand in hand. So what we're not about is saying that this is going to replace that support. But now more than ever, that mixed funding ecology and the kind of three-legged stool approach of having a healthy mix of private, public and earned income has never really been more important. And in terms of sustainability, that's what we all need to look, as we know, to have that healthy mix, really. In Arts and Business, we've always defined private investment in 3 areas: business sponsorship, individual donations and trust and foundation support. And I think in the arts, traditionally in Northern Ireland, we've swayed to the business sponsorship side of private investment. In individual donations in Northern Ireland, we do lag well behind the rest of the UK. But I think it's fair to say, in terms of trusts and foundations, because of the huge investment we've had in our wonderful cultural infrastructure, that has helped increase the support as well. But I think what we'll hear today is from the trusts that are in the room is that they really are seeking and welcome increased applications from the arts in Northern Ireland. And the fact we've got so many of them here, I think is really evidence that they are absolutely behind that. And I think in terms of the support for the arts in Northern Ireland already, the MAC and this wonderful building that we're in is a great example of that. So I'm delighted that we have Anne Reynolds from the MAC here today. So before I hand over to Anne to say a few words, I just wanted to give you a rough idea of what's happening today in terms of the format. So in a moment, I will hand over to Anne. I'm delighted to have Nick Livingston from the Arts Council as well, who have funded this event today, but also the survey and the research that we're working on, which will inform a toolkit that we're going to produce after this event So we're going to take all the discussion and the learning that we get from today and put that into a toolkit to help you in this particular area. I'd also like to thank you for the time that you've taken in filling in the survey. And I know we get bombarded with lots of questionnaires. Really what that questionnaire was about was finding out where we are at the minute in Northern Ireland in terms of getting support from Trust Foundations, what your challenges are, what's working, what isn't. And where, as I say, that's going to inform the whole structure of today as well. So in terms of the format, after we hear from Nick and from Anne, I'm delighted that John Mulligan from SB Fairbairn is going to share his tips on how to get the basics right. And then we have a local case study. We have Emer Henry from Replay Theatre Company, who I'm delighted to say has recently joined the board of Arts and Business, as is Mike Fleming, which is in the audience here today as well. And Emer is going to share her experience of general fundraising, but also particularly from Trust Foundations as well. And then we move into the main part of this morning, and that is a panel discussion. And James from ACF is going to chair that. James is also, before that, going to share the headlines from the survey that you filled in, and we're delighted that Una Murphy, who worked with James on that survey, is here today to help James do that. So the bulk of it will be a discussion, will be a panel discussion, and we do want you all to participate in that. After that's all finished, that brings us to the end of the morning, and lunch will be served back next door again. And then this room is going to be reconfigured, and the surgeries will happen in here. All the chairs will be cleared, and we'll just have 8 tables around the edge of the room, and that's where the surgeries will happen later on. So we'll get things moving. Can I first of all introduce Anne to say a few words from the MAC?
Hi everybody, I just wanted to welcome you. You know that I'm not on your sheet. I wasn't supposed to be speaking, but when you're all here, I just wanted to say that it's great to see you all. It's great to have you in the MAC. I have the edifying responsibility of telling you about how to evacuate the building in the event of a fire. Go out the doors you came in. That's how complicated it gets. I've also got some bespoke MAC housekeeping rules, which some of you might have heard of. We want no spitting, no heckling, no snogging in the back row, and no running in the aisles. Apart from that, you can do what you like. I just wanted to, Marion asked me if I would say just a few words about the journey we've gone on the MAC and specifically in relation to trusts and foundations. Obviously the MAC was made possible in large part due to public subsidy from the Arts Council, DCAL, DSD and Belfast City Council. But if it hadn't been for the trusts and foundations, some of them are here, Ulster Garden Villages, Esme Fairbairn, Paul Hammond Foundation, Weston, the Monument Trust and Foundation for Sport and the Art, we wouldn't have managed it either. And also, I'm sure lots of you know this as much as I do, that it isn't only about the cash for people like John Mulligan and Alison and Dorothy and Paul Hammond. It's also about sometimes the quality of the conversation. We plough such a lonely furrow in the arts. There are so few people who genuinely understand what we do and why we're doing it. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with Srila Ghosh from the Esme Fairbairn conversation. And I was banging on about new and emerging artists and cutting their teeth and the value of a small scale space and how that linked into a mid scale space. And I realised that I didn't need to tell her that she knew more about it than I did. And that helps you just sort of, it's a bit of a wind in your sails whenever you're fighting on all fronts and sometimes having to turn yourselves inside out to talk about economic regeneration and urban regeneration and cultural tourism and social cohesion, all of which are very valuable byproducts of what we do. But let's face it, not always the main driver for why we decided we wanted to set up a festival or build a venue or put on a show. So it's the imprimatur, the support, the crack, and the cash. And I welcome them all and you all to the MAC, and I hope you have a great day. I'm sure you will.
Thanks very much, Anne. I'm now delighted that Nick Livingston from the Arts Council has joined us, and we work very closely, obviously, as a strategic partner of the Arts Council in trying to help support the sector and grow private investment. And I know increasing income from Trust Foundations is a huge priority. So, Nick.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Anne. I promise to solemnly observe all the rules of that. I shall not blaspheme. Rare. I shall not get drunk or unruly. Rare.
That wasn't one of the rules.
We need some new rules. We need some new rules. Anyway, lovely to see you all here this morning. I'm delighted as well to welcome our visitors, some from near, some from far, and to congratulate Mary and her team on assembling this event today, which, as she explained, is part of a continuum of work that she is doing to support the sector in challenging times. Challenging times for everybody, challenging times for the charities represented here today, challenging times for us all. Just thinking, as I was preparing for this today, about the growing number of things that are coming onto the radar. Early years, increased number of people who are excluded from society through disability, through hearing loss, other forms of sensory limitation, highlighted by Lord Ashley, who died last Friday. Promoting increased access, the World of Adapt, for example, and their pioneering work, led by Brian Ricks many years ago, in trying to encourage people to have physical access to the arts. And of course, the increasing number of Black, minority, Asian and other ethnic communities who feel disempowered amongst us. The increasing number of older people, amongst whom I count myself, who are happily living longer, but are finding that in retirement that they are no longer able to make the same contribution that they once did. They find that they're on the margins and for lots of reasons are excluded and cannot play as fulfilling a role in society as they once did. All of these raise social justice issues for us all, and I think actually the arts help us to unpack some of those issues. And I just wanted to mention very briefly the work that we've been doing with Atlantic Philanthropies, and in particular how imaginatively the arts have helped to raise public awareness about some of the issues that I've just mentioned, and about the Bellwether project in particular, which we've been running with ministers and MLAs as a mechanism to try and test their level of sensitivity and awareness, not only to these issues, but the role that the arts can play in helping to address them. So I hope you have a very successful morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming, and thank you also to our guests here from the Trust Foundations.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick, and thanks very much indeed for your support for the event today. So it's now time to move on to our first main speaker, and that is John Mulligan from ACNI Fairburn. So John, if you'd like to come ahead.
So when I get set up, I just tell a story about kind of approaching the MAC today. Kind of my mind wandered back about 5 years ago when a very committed, passionate person of the arts sat opposite me and Alison actually, and painted out this vision of what Belfast would have in 5-10 years' time. And I have to say, I went away from that meeting kind of sceptical of the scale of the ambition, sceptical that stakeholders in Northern Ireland would have the imagination and the drive to put something like this together. And that kind of scepticism followed me through, kind of even when I was wearing a hard hat and kind of seeing how much still had to go and what the deadline was, kind of seemed like about 9 months ago. I just didn't think that we'd have what we have in front of us, and that probably illustrates why I'm a grants manager and Anne is sitting as Chief Executive of the MAC, because I think there is that drive, that imagination, that creativity within the arts field, which you know, part of the message of what I'm going to try and get across today is very rarely actually expressed and explicit within the applications which come before us. And I think the challenge for everybody, not just those applicants in the arts sector, but across the voluntary sector, to really the challenge is to try to bottle some of that joy that is within your working lives, and I think you know there's plenty of raw material there. I'll give you a little bit of a kind of an introduction to us. We have about £30 million to give away each year, most of which is in the main fund, which is a general fund and open to applications from the voluntary sector across 4 very diverse areas. Arts and heritage, which accounts for about, I'm looking at Alison, about 25 to 27% of total funding. The environment, education, both around about 10%, and then the vast bulk in social change, which covers the panoply of what's left, I suppose, in the voluntary sector. So very broad interests. The main fund criteria are really, to be honest with you, the 7 out of 8 applications that we turned down would probably all have a claim to say, to some extent, they are satisfying one or more of these criteria. And you will find that in the Trust Foundation world, there are people who are very baggy, like us, who kind of say, give us your application and we will process it in a way that will eventually end up either with a rejection or what we call internally an ACNI grant. And sometimes the potions that go into determining whether you get an ACNI grant are mysterious. And in many ways, the difficulty to communicate is on both sides, both foundations and applicants. And one of the reasons we accept kind of invitations like this is possibly to provide some more of that texture which underpins a lot of the decisions that we make. So I'll not deal with these in depth because, as I say, they're almost redundant these days. You almost need to initiate that conversation to make sense of them. I'll go through these one by one. But I want to start by saying that when I first joined the foundation world about 6 years ago, I realised that I'd been harbouring under two very, very bad assumptions. The first is my image of the foundation. My image of the foundation was kind of, you know, a crowd of misers sitting with very tight wads, kind of behind a secret door that you needed a formula to unlock. And the second misassumption was that when I was making funding applications, everybody was much better than me, and it took about 2 weeks for those assumptions to collapse. First of all, we're like businesses in a way. Our trade is in making good grants, and actually, if we're behind on our target, then there's a problem. So our business is getting money out the door. There's no incentive for us to actually keep it hoarded. And I think we often use the language of business as leads. We use pipeline development. There's all sorts of language which we use, which are kind of, you know, you would find it in an ordinary business environment. The difference is, whereas most businesses want money in the door, we want it out. So I think that completely reversed my philosophy about the fact that there is a kind of a real desire to find good stuff. And I think, you know, if we're prepared to meet you more than halfway, then that should give people a great deal of confidence, more confidence that there's not some kind of lock which is waiting for a secret formula. The second one is the standards of application, I have to tell you, are very poor on the whole. I mean, Alison and I sit in a Tuesday meeting with a list of the applications that have come in that week, usually 60, 70 applications, and the Ds, which are immediate rejections on the basis of 2 pages, way exceed even the ones that are debatable. And you know, I think you know, you should sit there thinking we don't have a hugely high bar to actually get above. And I think the mistakes that a lot of organisations make will make up most of the rest of what I've got to say. I think what I would urge on you to kind of understand is that trusts and foundations are very much personalities. I think that comes with its own advantages and its disadvantages. The contrast with like the European funding, for example, is that it's civil servants that are making decisions according to very, very tight criteria and often thirsty for stats and indices of multiple deprivation and need and such like. Whereas the Trust and Foundation world is very much the product of its origins, its history, the people who've moved in and out of the organisation, the staff team from hundreds of different experiences. picked up largely from the worlds that you live in. And I think that we're less swayed by statistics. We're not faceless in terms of a remote kind of body which is making decisions very scientifically. We're swayed by the ordinary kinds of emotions which very much feed the work that you undertake. And we like challenging stuff. It doesn't need to come with a stamp of populism. And especially with the Esme Fairbairn, we're interested in breaking new ground, innovation. So it's kind of the first point I would like to make is that you really need to establish a kind of a resonance or a connection. There's so many applications that we receive which are written in such general, jargonized language that the actual, what lies behind it, the quality stuff, the things that make you get up in the morning, the things that bring a smile to the faces of your audiences, is impossible to see behind that fog. And often we tell applicants what they should do is actually give their application to someone who doesn't know them, outside of the family, possibly, to save any face, but actually give them an opportunity to see whether or not they got an emotional response to it, and I think that's important. I think what I would say is with all these abundant, the 5 or 6 foundations that are here today will each have a unique, distinct personality based on all the things I've talked about. And I think the best thing you can do before putting in an application is to find out who you're actually dealing with. What is the language on their website? Who have they given grants to before? Do they tend to like the startup organizations? What kind of annual periods, what kind of size of grants do they give out? We get our fair share of applications which will be for £300,000 over 2 years from an organisation which had a turnover of 50,000 last year. Now, there's no way that a foundation is going to become the primary funder on whom that organisation is going to go into the future dependent upon. And I would just urge you to do your homework, and that may involve phoning people, possibly grant holders that are in the room today, to ask what kind of thing will Esme be interested in. If you can, and we're not the greatest exponents of this, if you can initiate a conversation, try to have a conversation with the people that you're trying to apply to. For the last couple of years, simply because of volume issues, we have not tended to have a pre-application conversation with organisations. I think we're coming to a realisation that may be self-defeating, because if even a percentage of the ultimately failed applications which come to us had lifted the phone and we'd had a 10-minute conversation, we might have saved ourselves, both them and us, a lot of trouble. I think the third point I would make is there's a tendency, and it's a tendency I have to say, despite my accent, that I have to pin more on Northern Ireland than in the rest of the United Kingdom. There is a tendency to go for accentuate the negative in terms of needs. And you may have heard this before, but it bears repeating. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe the narrative has been successful in funding before, but I have to say that the kind of the traditional Troubles narrative is wearing a bit thin, to be honest with you. It's there's probably a time for brutal honesty, and I think it's today. I think there's a everybody. Whenever I used to go on holiday and people heard where I was from, there was a realization there was a divided community. There was violence. There's no point in repeating that in an application to a UK-based foundation. There's so much that you do not need to put in an application. coming from Northern Ireland. You can hint at some of the problems obliquely, but let the funders do their own work. You know, they will have that contextual knowledge about what the issues are in Northern Ireland. If it's an arts specialist funder, they will have lots of contextual knowledge, equally as kind of Anne said about Srila. She knew, my previous colleague, she knew you know, a lot about the issues that you do not need to put in an application. Because if you're putting that in an application, it is immediately indistinctive from what anybody else can put in that application. As far as possible, you should be able to read your application back, and every word of that should be unique to you. And I think that's an important message. The race to the bottom won't work, and I know this is probably more kind of appropriate to the social change organisations, but I think it also applies across the sector, because there'll always be a neighbourhood, whether this side of the water or that side of the water, which will be able to come up with an index of multiple deprivation which will be worse or better than yours. I would encourage you to build on positivity. Yes, there are these problems, but Northern Ireland is here and the arts are here. This is what we've got. We've got tons of creativity. We've got audiences we can see. You know, there's a lot of vibrancy and sometimes a hell of a lot more vibrancy in Northern Irish communities. You know, and I know that because I come back regularly. There's a spark and a vibrancy about the place that really doesn't come across in the applications and should. So build on the positive. The next point is track record. We get applications where our application process is fairly straightforward, 4 questions, and people have to say, describe the organisation, what impact have you got, what project do you want to do, very, very standard, straightforward. And people spend about 5 lines on track record and what have you done, and the rest of the application is spent either in opaque, jargonized language, or in a kind of this is what we do. And I think it's akin to applying for a job. It's almost like answering 1 question on your previous career and 7 questions about exactly what you'll do once you've got the job. And no employer will kind of recruit on that sort of basis. So if I had one task for everybody to do, is I would look at your kind of track record over the last 3 or 4 years and actually come up with what you feel is a succinct bullet point record of what are the best things that you and your organisation, your colleagues, have done in the past 4 years. And if you can get that down to a succinct set of bullet points, then I would definitely suggest that you cut and paste that into every application. It's not standard, it's unique to you, but it actually, gets across to us something worthwhile and genuine. And I think as part of that, stories are essential. I think that you really need to provide much more colour and texture to the applications, which may include case studies, it may include quotes. There's so many applications you read on a Friday afternoon that don't give you any sense of the human. And I think whether it's what people's reaction to your work has been, it's often dry, it's often lengthy, and doesn't communicate, as I said at the beginning, that celebration, which is what the arts is supposed to be all about. So include stories. What I would also say is length is not everything. The way in which you can express yourselves, if it can be succinct, then you're halfway there, because there is a growing trend amongst foundations to actually start with the foundation equivalent of the elevator pitch. You do, because of the volumes of applications involved, trusts are tending to put more of their energies into the due diligence of applications that they think are going to make grants. That's just the reality of it. And to more and more have gone away from the idea of these kind of 15, 16 page first applications to a two-stage process, which involves mostly 2 pages and no more. And that is the opportunity that you have to grab people's attention. And I think that elevator pitch puts huge premium on being able to express yourself succinctly. That's why 5 or 6 lines of track record, which distills the best of the organisation. Try not to mix up the really good with the mediocre, because you immediately devalue the really good. So I would really, and you know, involve more people than just yourself as fundraisers, chief executives. Try and involve everybody in that process, whether you're doing an annual review, ask people as an exercise just to, if nothing else, it'll improve morale if people can think of 4 or 5 things they're really proud of. The next one's a bit confusing. It's to projectify or not to projectify. What's often the case is that people feel as if they have to come up with a new project in order to and if possible, fund the director's post out of, you know, a cut of that funding. I think, you know, look hard enough and you will find foundations like ourselves who, if we're really keen on the work and what your ideas have been and what they are, then we will consider director's salary, we'll consider important posts, administrator, you know, whatever it is the need, then we will meet you halfway. And if you convince us that's where the need is, then we'll, you know, we'll listen to the argument at the very least. So I think there is this struggle and often an assumption that you have to come up with something shiny, and it's, you know, it just doesn't fit the environment we're in. You know, sometimes it might surprise you that across the foundation world, the application rate is coming down. That staggers me in the current climate, and the kind of one of the popular explanations for that is that people are running around trying to secure the core and actually, you know, and actually look to Trust Foundations as providing the veg, the potatoes and the veg, and actually the meat is somewhere else. Don't harbour under that illusion, and you know, for the people who've got surgeries with us later on, you can ask us about core costs and salaries, you know, of core members of staff. I'll just, to finish off, just give you a kind of an instinct for the priorities for the arts. So we will not spend a huge amount of time on our kind of the priorities which kind of underpin the foundation as a whole. Of much more interest to you will be the priorities for the arts. And these were, we came up with these following a review which Alison conducted last year with the help of a consultant in the sector. And essentially it was an exercise which was designed to come up with a set of priorities which we could use at occasions like this to make those original priorities a bit more real. So what I'll do is I'll leave those up for you, and presumably kind of at the open discussion point there'll be an opportunity maybe to ask us specifically, or catch Alison or I at the lunch interval and ask us how we make sense of those particular priorities. Okay, thanks very much.
John, thank you very much indeed. That was really, really insightful. It's really interesting. One of the things that we hear a lot from you describe yourself as businesses, one of the things we hear from the business community is just that kind of challenge for us as a sector to sell that kind of really positive, passionate story about what we do, rather than that the kind of needy ask as such, and selling just the positive about the impact and the need that we meet as a sector, really, rather than the need that we have as such. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Emer Henry from Replay Theatre Company, who's going to share some of her experiences in this area. Emer.
Brona Whittaker asked me a couple of weeks ago if I would be happy enough just to share some of my experiences in my time working in the arts at Replay, but also before that working in heritage, in terms of perhaps some successes that I've had with trusts and foundations, but equally some of the lessons that I've learnt. And I suppose that's a good place to start. I'm no way sitting in this chair as an expert. I'm sure there are many people in this room that has greater fundraising experience than I have, but really all I hope to do is to share with you some of my experiences. I started working in heritage about 8 years ago, and I think now moving on to the arts, I do actually see quite a distinct approach from both of those sectors, which I suppose largely operate within what we might call a larger cultural sector in terms of their approach to fundraising. Certainly my experience with the heritage sector was that they were intensely focused about what kind of organisation they were and what it was that they wanted to do. And sometimes that kind of rigid approach reaped benefits, but equally I do think sometimes it prevented a certain kind of creativity and innovative approach to working in partnership with other organisations and specifically with broader funders. The arts, in contrast, I think can sometimes suffer for obvious reasons from being a little bit funds-led. I think that instinctively we know who we are as organisations, we know what we want to do, but sometimes that's not impossible. And in terms of justifying our core existence, that takes so much of our effort and resource that when it comes to projects, we perhaps are a little bit too flexible in terms of the projects that we're willing to do, just because we feel that there's funds out there to be secured to enable us to do those projects. And over my time at Replay, I've identified two clear contrasting approaches in my own fundraising, and it's what I started to call the strategic approach and the shortfall approach. For me, the strategic approach is something that I want to do, something that I'm really committed to doing, but not always something that's realistic in terms of managing day to day the organisation and the work that we do. And really the strategic approach is about building relationships, it's about researching, it's about looking at our programme overall in a lot greater context. It's about what John just mentioned, about how the core of our organisation is just as attractive as creating lots of additional projects. It's about having that security in what we do and not always the need to justify it. And I suppose now with changes to how we work with the Arts Council, it's about looking overall at a 3-year programme and seeing that statutory funding and private funding aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, that there are elements of our programme that may attract either or. Equally, there are elements of our programme where we can bring statutory and private funders to work together in partnership with us. And we've had a number of successes in that area. In particular, I will go on to talk briefly about one success with the Lloyd's TSB Foundation for Northern Ireland. But then there's that trap that all too often that I fall into, and I recognise myself as falling into, and yet I can't help myself, and that's the shortfall funding. I think with the nature of how we secure funding for projects in Northern Ireland, it's quite often through a national lottery programme, and we've all been in that situation where we've applied to lottery for £50,000 for a project that costs 58. They come back and they say, we'll give you 35, and suddenly you realise we can cut 2,000 here, we can cut 2,000 there, but we need another 5 or 10, and where are we going to get it from? And it's just about filling that gap, it's about filling that fundraising gap as quickly as possible. And we then go into the mode of just getting as many trusts and foundations applications out as possible in as quick a time as possible. And that's when you stop doing the research, you stop looking at the language of the trust and foundation, you stop looking at how that matches your language, and it is just to a certain extent about that desperate place where you know that a project needs to start in 6 months and sometimes in 3 months, and you need the money and you need it now. I would like to think, or at least I'm hopeful, that year on year the number of those applications that goes out to replay has declined. I think overall that's certainly a trend that I've seen during my time at Replay, is that generally the number of applications that we put out has declined. So we may have gone 5 years from putting 20, 30 applications out in a year to actually maybe putting out anything from as little as 5 to 8. And I hope that that's a recognition on my part that actually it's about using your time the best that you possibly can. Because when you're desperate for funding, that's actually the very time when you become least efficient and as a result least effective in terms of securing funding for the projects that you really want to do. I talked a little about talking a language. I think again that's something that I've learnt and something that perhaps we haven't been particularly good at in the past. And it's in stark contrast to how we approach other forms of fundraising. So if it's individual donations, you recognise that you need to talk a very human language because you're asking another human being to give you money. If you're talking about the Arts Council, you recognise that that's an entirely new language that we've all learnt over recent years in terms of statutory funding and economic appraisals and deprivation indexes and everything else that we need to do in order to secure the funds that we need. And then also we've worked closely with organisations like Arts and Business to develop pitches and to talk a business language, so that a business recognises easily and succinctly what they're going to get from you as an organisation. But I think what we've done very little of is talking a trust and foundations language, recognising that each trust and foundation is individual, will have its own personality behind it, and that it's not about applications by formula or applications by number, that it's not a civil servant that's making a decision on your application. It is a human being with their own history and with their own experiences. Not that civil servants are not human beings. And I think that that's something that we've tried to develop. I think that again, it's a very specific example of working with Lloyd's TSB Foundation that's helped us to learn that language and also to translate it and to adapt it with other funders that we work with. And so just to tell you a little bit about the history behind Replay and Lloyd's TSB Foundation, and I know that there's 2 representatives from the foundation here today. Replay over a number of years had been successful in securing appropriate and realistic amounts of small grants funding from Lloyd's TSB to perhaps add value to a specific programme that we had been delivering as part of our overall artistic annual programme. And I think what we learnt there was that with Lloyd's TSB, it wasn't automatic that we felt that we deserved funding because we are an arts organisation, because that's not what their priorities are. Their priorities are about disadvantage and disability, and we looked at our core programme, we looked at the elements that was reaching out to that, and we also looked at areas that we could improve or that we could work in partnership with Lloyd's TSB to improve. And so we started with £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 over a number of years on what I feel particularly successful projects for the company. But then came an opportunity for a programme that Lloyd's TSB was piloting called Creating Change Programme. It's one of those programmes that in your wildest dreams you never think is possible, where an organisation actually wants to invest in you for 6 years. There's not an ongoing application process. It's all upfront once they decide that you're the organisation that they want to trust and fund, then that relationship grows and develops. We were lucky enough, along with Kids in Control, who are also in the audience today, to be 2 of, I think, 3 arts organisations that were successful in securing that Creating Change funding, which was to our organisation worth £120,000 over 6 years. Is it 120 or was it 100? It was 100. So you know myself, 20.
Even though you're plugging.
I know.
Good try.
And I think that has been an exceptionally positive experience for our company in a very holistic way in terms of the relationships that we have built, how we can identify and expand on how statutory organisations and funders can work with the private sector in helping us to achieve our objectives and aims as an organisation. And I hope that it might be something that develops in terms of other trusts and foundations taking up that model. But for us it was very much about learning a language and talking a language and also not losing the personal in what we do. So we got an opportunity to stand up in front of Sandara and 3 or 4 members of her board and passionately for 15 or 20 minutes talk about who Replay was, who Replay wanted to be, and also what the organisation embodied in terms of the people that worked for Replay and the people that we work with and our collaboration. And that was so refreshing because I know that sometimes it can be really demoralising when you spend so much of your day looking at economic appraisals and everything that we need to do to secure funding to actually get an opportunity and talk about who you are as an organisation is such a lovely thing to be able to do. And I think that we need to remember that when we apply to all trusts and foundations. Actually they just want to know who you are. They don't need us to justify why we exist. They don't need us to justify who we are in relation to another arts organisation that lives 5 miles down the road from us. They don't need us to justify the levels of participation, the levels of audience, the levels of engagement. They just want to hear our story. And I hope that Joanne and Sandara and everyone in Lloyds and TSB really understands Replay's story now and feels that it was a good investment. But I think that investment would never have happened if we hadn't had the opportunity to make those connections, to talk that language and to build those relationships. I suppose finally the thing that I have learnt is that sometimes it just isn't the right project, or sometimes you're just not the right organisation, and that there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's like everything in life, it's not inevitable that it's the right match or that it's an appropriate match, and sometimes you just have to hold your hands up and say, actually, I gave it a go, but it wasn't right for me in terms of Replay, nor was it right for the Trust and Foundation. And I think sometimes we do have to be a little self-critical in that sometimes we need to admit that it's not that they haven't got us, it's that actually we didn't do very well in communicating who we are. And I know that I've had that in a very recent experience over this past 6 months where I felt that it went really well. I was absolutely devastated when the rejection came. I very much felt that it was rejection both personally and in terms of the organisation, because it was for such a large and important and what we felt innovative advancement in our work. And it was only a couple of weeks ago that I finally got to sit down with the Trust and Foundation, talk through the assessment, and I came out of that after initially getting really defensive and realised actually I just need to hold my hands up. I didn't very effectively communicate in that particular instance what it was that was so brilliant and unique about my project. And I know that it's brilliant and unique and it's going to happen anyway. But they got no sense of that. And this was this was a Trust and Foundation who was familiar and had a history with the company, and yet what I thought was an absolutely groundbreaking project, they just didn't get. And again, it is about the fact that you're talking to another human being, and sometimes you just don't get each other. And I'm not going to give myself a hard time about it. I've moved on, and I sent the Trust and Foundation a very nice email after the phone call to say, actually, thanks for taking the time to talk to me, and we really value the support that you've given us in the past, and it's about waiting for the right project to work with you in the future, and hopefully we will.
Thanks very much. chat chamber. James is going to share some very headline figures from the survey that you took the time to fill in. But don't worry, we can share all of these presentations with you afterwards. You don't need to write loads of notes. We just want to kind of set the context before we get into the discussion. So, okay, James.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to you all for the wealth of data that you provided, because I think it's going to help inform this discussion. And what we'll do is we'll run through quite quickly some of these headline figures. But importantly, we don't want to lose time for an exchange with the personalities that are here, and then of course you'll have the chance, those of you that have booked one-to-one sessions. So I'm going to ask Una to come up and just go through the survey and some of the key data that's coming from the survey that you all complete, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't. So,
Can you speak up to it?
okay, that's great.
So firstly, well, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Bin Murphy. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Ulster, but I've been working with James in Arts and Business on compiling this research. So thank you to everyone that filled in the survey. I know I spoke to many of you on the phone, left voicemails, chased you by email. So we just kind of really wanted to share with you some of the outcomes of that survey, and really to demonstrate that it wasn't a survey for a survey's sake, but it's actually really shaped the kind of the symposium today and kind of future work that Arts and Business are going to do. So firstly, the thing that really surprised all of us when we sat down, when we were planning this, and then also when we come back to look at the data, we had 98 different trusts and foundations named as trusts and foundations that arts organisations in Northern Ireland had applied to. To put that in context, we had 60 responses to the survey, and 37 organisations had made applications. So 37 organisations have managed to find 98 trusts and foundations. I think whenever I first came to this, I expected maybe 20 or 30. So that's a really interesting kind of scale of the diversity of trusts and foundations out there. What this table shows quite nicely, I get in the way, but is the pink are successful applications and the grey are unsuccessful. So these kind of trusts and foundations, for example, only had one application, some were successful, some weren't, and then you'll see here there's kind of different percentage rates for different trusts and foundations. So James is going to pick up on this a bit more about how do we turn those greys into pinks, how do we increase the success rate, and maybe, for example, that might be by applying to less trusts and foundations than the 98 that are out there. So then we broke it down and we looked at the success rate of these applications that people had reported on in the survey. So overall, the success rate was 38%. But it's interesting to note as well at 14% pending, so that is relatively quite high. We kind of found that there were similar figures across the number of staff, so small organisations and large organisations. There was a slight difference between larger organisations and the success rate being slightly lower, but James is going to pick up on that and kind of tease out some of the issues there. So then this is just another one that we thought was quite interesting, and we asked you kind of how you spent the investment that you got from trusts and foundations, and it really is quite varied. Kind of education community projects and one-off projects probably quite align, quite similar, and do form a bulk, with kind of the core programme also kind of playing an interesting role there of about 21%. Alongside kind of looking at the diversity of how people are spending the money, we were kind of interested to see that 90% of respondents said that they intended to apply to the same or more trusts and foundations in the next financial year. So that kind of really justified our research, which was quite nice, but it shows it is an increasing area for arts organisations to be focusing on. Overall, of the 60 respondents, we had the 37 that had been compliant as trusts and foundations. we found 4%, Trust and Foundations funding made up 4% of total turnover. So it's a small but sizable proportion, and this, we just go back to, if we can kind of turn those greys into more pinks, then that 4% could dramatically increase, and that's something that James is going to talk about how we do that.
Okay. So what are the sort of the headline conclusions that we could draw from that? I think this staggering figure was the number that were out there, but there is an issue that there was a lot there that were single applications that were not successful, so maybe they were inappropriate altogether. We need to look at that. But I think you'll agree that there's an array of funders out there that, you know, that means that there is perhaps some untapped potential. And from those that we have here, there's also an appetite to fund more. And that is, and I think this is the critical point here, and this is where I want the discussion to really help develop understanding of this, is it's more quality applications, so not only are we getting more, but we're getting more and better and a higher success rate. But the other thing is the spectrum of work that is supported. I think there were a few exceptions of very specific specialised areas that we're finding some difficulty, but by and large most of the responses were saying they were able to find sources of funds that were appropriate to their work. So the sort of the challenge, or what I'd like to get the discussion now around, is really how do we increase the quality and the quantity of appropriate applications. Now, this is your chance to get what you can out of this panel, okay? Out of each of these distinct personalities that exist here. And rather than have each one of them introduce themselves as to what their own foundation does, and that would take us the full hour, I'm just going to ask them very briefly when they're brought into the discussion just to say a word or two about their respective organisations. But just so you know who's here. Valerie, Munster Garden Villages. Barbara from Community Foundation Northern Ireland. John from the Jerwood Charitable Foundation. Terry from BBC Children in Need. Jim from the Fermanagh Trust. Dorothy from Paul Hamlin Foundation. John from Esme Fairbairn Foundation. Simon from the Wolfson Foundation. Sandara from Lloyd's TSB Foundation. Miriam from BBC Performing Arts Fund. And Alison from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. I've been emailing them flat out the last couple of weeks. We talk about developing relationships. Now, I'm delighted that they're here. 5 are from Great Britain, and they, you know, as I've said, they do have an appetite. They do fund here, and they want to fund more. So let's use them while they're here. The sort of things I thought that might help in our discussion would be to look at some of the best things that came out, but also to address some of the worst. So from what we gathered from the survey responses is that generally you're finding, and please feel free to challenge us in the discussion, that information is pretty good, that there are sources you can use, you know, whether it's Grant Tracker, whether Funder Finder, Trust Finder, that information is around. Sometimes, okay, you have to pay for it and subscribe. And on the respective websites, that generally the information is good. That the range of support is wide. That there is, we discussed this as well, an empathy with the sector. That you know, it's not faceless. There is an understanding. That by and large, application processes are fairly straightforward, and that subsequently, if successful, the ease of reporting and so on is very helpful compared to other forms of funding. And that relationships are generally good, but it's accepted that it's not easy to develop a relationship with a funder that's London-based, or elsewhere for that matter. On the downside, Una's already sort of alluded to it, this is a small proportion of the totality of funding across the sector, and as we found from the survey, sort of reflected that about 4% of the total income came from trusts and foundations. But for some organisations, it was very significant, a very significant proportion of their income. The fact that it's a very competitive process, I I think pick up John's point there. Yes, it may well be, but that's your opportunity to shine in a way, and that's life. Let's say it's not that anyone should be owed funding through the process, and you have to get over that hurdle. But the bar is not that high, and it's sort of an open door. There is an issue, and I think this is a slightly difficult one, around criteria becoming increasingly restrictive. Now, part of that is from the funder's perspective to avoid nugatory work and applications that are inappropriate, and they're becoming more strategic. Now, that has its good side and its bad side, but by and large, people were putting that up as being a criticism of processes. And I think there is an issue with that there is a little bit of sort of a gap in the market that seems to be emerging. There seems to be a lot of opportunities for very small amounts of money, and then if you're prepared to go for the very much larger scale, there are those opportunities, and there's a bit of a gap emerging in the middle. And maybe some of the funders will be able to address that. Despite doing simple procedures, long processing times is generally an issue for people, but I think again that's an issue of just understanding and getting into their cycles. Lack of feedback came up from a lot of people, so I think it's something we will have to address with the panel. The issue of time and resources required is an interesting one. It was actually, I thought this was going to come up a lot, but it really didn't. But it has to be mentioned. It was there from a few. But again, I think there's a general recognition that you do have to invest something in this, and if you do it in a way, as Emer said, that is planned and strategic, you can get sort of the ducks lined up. And the sort of proof was in the success rate that it didn't matter about scale of organisation in terms of numbers of staff and turnover as to the number of applications and success rates. I mean, you have to have staff to be successful in this. Now, okay, it still requires somebody to put in that effort, but I think that maybe reflects a little bit on what was said earlier about the pitch and the message and so on, the passion behind that. So, right, we've got about 45 minutes or so. So I want to open it to yourselves, and then I'll ask the panel to respond to issues who wants to pick it up and say a few words about themselves. So if I could open it up to the floor, what way do you want to take us? We could look at some of these issues. Like, what about the issue of gap in the marketplace? Is this something that is a challenge for people? Are they finding that it's inappropriate levels of funding? Is it all too small generally, or to get through that process of the two-stage process?
It's just a sort of general question. How open are foundations to kind of partner funding? That, for instance, if Vesme supporting something, would Hamlin support it, or is that something that you would look to, or is it just depending on the particular situation? John, if you want to go with it.
Can I get someone else in?
Yeah.
Start? Simon, I know you are interested in partnership arrangements. Maybe say a few words about Wolfson as well, just before you come back on that.
Wolfson Foundation, we give away about 30 million a year.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. We give away about 30 million a year across quite a broad range, actually: science and medicine, arts and humanities, and health and welfare issues. Arts and humanities is about 23% of that budget, and we're primarily focused on capital funding. So we're looking at new buildings, sometimes equipment, refurbishment, restoration, those sorts of things. So we don't really do the core funding side of it, or the project funding, but it's capital. In terms of partnerships, I'm always wary about speaking for the sector because we're so diverse, but our experience is that we, as trusts and foundations, don't tend to work together formally very often, but we often will fund the same projects. So to come back to the original question, we often see it actually as a plus if someone like Esme or Paul Hamlin are on there already as committed funders. It's almost a mark that this project has passed their benchmark. And so it's a vote of confidence in the project, if you like. So I think that would be my response. There's not a lot of formal partnership working, but we'll often fund the same projects, and that is a plus.
another co-funder of projects, Valerie, Ulster Garden Building.
Yeah. For any of you that have been coming to class, you'll know that we ask you to find the balance of funding. Okay, right, I'll shout. Right, you get me at the back now? Yeah, we usually look for matched funding or balance funding, but we also like to be challenge funders as well in at the start. And I think that's something certainly with the MAC, for instance, where we were in at the beginning. And for our part, we do enjoy being that. But again, we would look for an array of funders, and maybe if you come to us with one funder, we would look at it as maybe we haven't tried hard enough. You've put out a lot of applications, and we're going to be part of that cocktail and mix. So what I would say is just be careful of maybe doing 100% to one particular funder.
Alison, do you want to say a few words about co-funding or partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, echo what Simon was saying, is that we definitely do look at applications that have other funding as being a benchmark that the other funders are involved, and we all have a slightly different emphasis on why we're funding, and I think you quite often see projects that are funded for different reasons at different foundations, but a project that encompasses all those areas is the one that's going to really get the maximum funding, and that's why we all fund it for different ideas, different parts of a project.
What about issues around application processes and time, or anything else?
John mentioned the two sheets. But I think it's very hard to find passion on 2 sheets and trying at the same time be aware of what the actual foundation is all about. So I do appreciate that we're here today, that maybe you can talk visually face to face and give a bit of passion, because I don't think it can be found on 2 sheets. I think it's quite hard.
Okay. Dorothy, your application process is generally 2-stage, isn't it?
It is a 2-stage application. The first stage is a bit longer than 2 sheets. It's, I think, about 7 pages, but 2 of those are sort of basic address and name and website information. So the actual part where you answer questions about yourself and about your proposed work, I think, is about 5 pages divided into 7-8 questions. So it's a bit longer, and it's about trying to strike that balance between not so much that we can't cope with it at the second stage, but on the other hand giving you enough opportunity to convince us, because I think 2 stages is a challenge.
John, do you work on a single stage or 2-stage process?
It's quite an informal process, actually. On our website we say 2 pages, and that, again, to reiterate what John and Dorothy had said, that is to control the amount of information coming to us, because we read so many applications. But often 2 pages isn't enough if it's backed up with a conversation as well. So we would pick up the phone and talk to us first.
Okay, we're getting on to then the building of the relationship. Do you feel comfortable just being able to pick up the phone to these, or John, you mentioned that you systematically don't do it. I know Sundara, Lloyd's TSB, Foundation Northern Ireland has a pre-application chat if you want it. How do you feel about that, about people inquiring about the applications before they're putting it in? Miriam, do you want to say something?
Well, we give smaller grants, so our maximum grant is £10,000. So, to be honest with you, the volume of people contacting us for, in the run-up to the application period, we couldn't cope because there's only 3 of us. So what we suggest is read everything on the website, then go to our Facebook page and our Twitter feed, and you'll see other people may have asked the questions. We kind of use those as forums where you can post questions and be quite specific if you want to. But what we don't want you to do is to apply and waste your time if you're not eligible. So what we've done this time round is put in an eligibility quiz almost at the start, so you know that you have got the bank account and the eligibility criteria. You're not going to fall down on something as basic as that before you go on to make your application.
John, you have the same thing, an eligibility quiz on the website. I don't know if you've seen the new website of Esme Fairburn, but you can, so that you can run through that, and we'll soon tell you whether you're eligible or not. as a volume funder, have you time to speak to it?
Well, Babies and Children in Need has a process that involves you can contact us. And although there's only 3 of us here, we do, because we're a UK funder, we do have a help desk, which are very nice people who will talk to you about your project as well. We have the online application, but we also have an assessment stage where every single application is either contacted or visited. So you have time to give us your passion and tell us your case studies.
Community Foundation, we encourage people to contact us. Again, we don't like people to waste their time. We have recently started a new programme called the Responsive Grant Making Programme, and it's on our website, and we do sort of have a checklist as well. It's 2-part, and the first part is just questions about your organisation, and the second part is simply just more like a checklist, and you just have to sign it and send it back to us. But again, at assessment level, we will try and either telephone the group or ask what and visit them, do it on an on-site visit. We do like to build up a relationship with the people and send the organization.
My question is much of the local one to do more the mainland based. I'm part of a national organisation, but we are a discrete regional entities, so I have a sort of double whammy, if you like, because a lot of the national charitable trusts that I would really like to engage remotely with are handled by my central colleagues, which I sometimes get feedback to say, oh well, they're weak in applications from Northern Ireland, so I'd love, a bit of steer on actually how then, do we tackle that? Is it that, I can drop you a line following the meeting of some of you today, or, how best we do that? Because Northern Ireland is a very different set of circumstances from UK mainland.
I think they're all open for for businesses, as John has said. So yeah, I think. Any other follow-up specifically on that?
I mean, we operate a sort of internal pipeline at national trusts, so certainly John will know of the organisation rather than Simon, but regionally we're not so well covered, which is something that's quite strong.
James, can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
As arts and business arts manager, I'm constantly telling arts organisations to attempt to cultivate trusts and foundations and to start the relationship building that John and in fact everybody so far has mentioned this morning. Is that, we've talked a lot about the start of a relationship, but is it appropriate where there are representatives working on a full-time basis for them to drop an email and to say, we're thinking of this project, is this something that's right for you? I mean, I know you mentioned about staff and resourcing and time and the eligibility. When you proceed past eligibility, can you then start to open up a dialogue? Is that something that you welcome?
John. Okay, inbox.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question for us.
Yeah.
And we acknowledge that, it's all very well me coming to an event like this and telling you everything you need to do, because there's a second side to the coin, and it's what we can do for you. And I don't think we get it right 100% of the time by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that's why we invested a huge amount of time and energy in the website. There was a video on there, kind of providing tips about applications. There's a huge amount of what we do fund, why we fund it, and I think across the foundation world there's a real commitment to communicate better, and I think we are getting better at it, but there's still things we could improve on. As far as pre-application, I suppose what everybody has to recognise is that whenever you're a generalist funder like us, I mean, we fund sharks, is kind of like or the preservation of sharks. And whilst we're funding kind of small community groups, kind of providing fantastic work on the ground, we've got a small applications fund which we administer internally, and it's very, if you imagine what that opens you up to in terms of pre-application conversations, it's a challenge, and the last thing we want to do is take away from some of the business at the other end of the equation, where you're trying to make sure that the right people get the right grants. So in the recent past, what we've done is we've tried to be light touch about the application, on the reasoning that 2 pages doesn't put a huge amount of burden on the applicant. But I think the feedback is that we need to do something else person to person at that early stage, and we haven't quite worked out what. So I mean, I think a couple of us are going to sit on the phone for a day or two, where we just, because a lot of the calls are fielded by the reception staff. We're just going to let them come in and actually see what demand there is for that service. We might not advertise it everywhere, but what we do is we just see if people contact us, what kind of burden it places on us, and then from there decide whether or not to have that 10-minute conversation.
Can I ask what your experience is here? Have you tried, or you find you're hitting brick walls, or have you found them open?
Outside Paul Hamlin Foundation, very good.
Open.
We were part of the Paul Hamlin Foundation like idea a few years back, and it was fantastic initiative. For those arts organisations on the fringe that aren't always recognised for what they're delivering.
My experience with the Lloyd CSB has been clear, but also Garden Villages Community Foundation and I has been absolutely consistent. Very, very good, very responsive, and give back feedback, what we should be doing, how we should be progressing, and all that. So fantastic, brilliant.
Dorothy, yeah.
I also wanted to sort of bring in the other end of what happens after people are funded, because it's all very well putting in a lot of time assisting people in a pre-application stage and during the 2 stages then of the formal filling in of forms. That takes quite a lot of time, and you can spend as much as you want, and it takes away time you can spend with grantees. And I think it's also for us about trying to get that balance right, about not spending all of our time making grants, like mice in a cage, and then finding that, over a 3-year period, you hardly have time to go and visit the work you fund. I mean, that's not right. So
right. That's sort of an interesting point. Actually, maybe we'll just pick up on that. I mean, chance to be brutally honest here. Once you've got the funding out of Paul Hamlin's Foundation, do you care if they turn up to see the work? Really, you do. Right. So it's not. It is as even Anne said at the outset. It's more the development of that ongoing relationship. You don't see it as interference. Have you had any experience of over interference?
I think one of the biggest gripes a lot of us have about the Arts Council and the City Council is that they don't have the time, and they don't come and see work. I mean, we have a 6-year funding with Lloyd's TSB through the Create and Change, and it's been fantastic, the relationship, them coming to see our work. We know everybody in the office, we can actually talk about individuals you've watched grow over a 4-year period, and it really means something to us.
Okay, yeah. Jim, from Anna Trust perspective, as a very local funder, the relationship must be pretty straightforward, because you're as part of that community as the applicants are.
Well, that's the best thing about the community foundation. You're within 30 miles of a site visit, and the site visit, in a way, gives that recognition to people who are making the application. And the site visit is an opener to many other things that's going on in that community as well. So, an application to the Vermont Trust by local people is a thing that we must go and physically read into, not just the application. Of course we have a website, but that's the only opener. The phone call is a must. It's about relationship building, and it's about continual dialogue with that grant recipient and see how they progress and build upon their initial grant over a period of time. So in community foundation, a local community foundation, it's about relationships and relationship building over time to see how community projects build, grow, have their failures, but then learn from that and grow again, with changing people all the time. And we never ever take for granted people's voluntary time, what the passion they have for projects. That's the blessing of a local trust, seeing that on the ground.
Can I just say, Jim, that makes it all worthwhile. Actually, when you go out on the ground and see the work being done, it really is the best part of my job. I can sit and assess all day, when you follow the groups and see how they progress and how their capacity is built and the good work they have done in the area. So that is really important too, the foundations, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to expand on Dorothy's point as well, and to take in those others, I mean, the best funding application is how you deliver the project we fund. You know, some people think that the achievement comes in getting the money, and actually spend less time on the reporting and actually, you know, monitoring some of the results of the work. And actually, you know, Alison will bear me out in this. We sit in a meeting, and actually we have real discussions about how a grant has gone with another organisation, and we can say, yeah, I think we're interested in them, and we immediately see that, you know, if there's a mediocre application comes in over 2 pages, they're more than this. You know, we have a whole set of stuff over and above are, you know, those 2 pages to judge the next application. And it has to say that if you get in the door without it being a closed shop to everybody else, because we do always like kind of, you know, making sure there's a good flow of new stuff coming in. But once you've got a grant, it's your opportunity to really press home, you know, in the kind of the impression on the funder, because they come to another application with a much more open mind.
Maybe Sundara, if I could bring you in here on how then you look to develop the Creating Change programme and a multi-annual engagement.
One of the most interesting things for the foundation about developing Creating Change was it was the first 6-year funding programme that any of the Lloyds TSB foundations had ran, and also, as far as I'm aware, in Northern Ireland at the time. And we took a decision very early on that we wanted to fund passionate people. Now, quite how we were going to find those passionate people or get their passion back in an application form challenged us immensely. And what we did was, once we carried out an initial assessment, we then interviewed every organisation that we felt would bring us those passionate people. And a couple of interesting things came out of that. One is we couldn't possibly do that for our standard grant programme. We get maybe 500-600 applications a year. The most we can manage is a visit, but in the main it tends to be a telephone call assessment, and that's just due to the volume. There's only 5.5 of us in the office. But the interesting thing about taking the time then, and we were giving out grants of £100,000, and that was very big for us. We wanted to take the time. There were organisations where the application was perfect. They had been co-funded by other reputable funders. They were doing good work, and this obviously wasn't just an arts application. But when they came into the room, they were tired. They were complacent. They pretty much expected us to write the cheque there and then, and were terribly surprised when they didn't get funded. And the other organisations, and the 2 women here are testimony to that, bounced into the room like Tigger, and they got the money. You know, so there is something around, if you have that opportunity to convey the passion. You know, if you don't know how to get it into 2 pages, go on a writing course and learn, because you need to get that opportunity to get face to face with the funder or on the phone with the funder, because it was passionate people we wanted. It wasn't fantastic projects. So it's really important to try and get that conversation. And sorry, just one other point. We call them pre-application meetings, but very often organisations that haven't bothered to contact us and are then unsuccessful can come along to those pre-application meetings if they're eligible to apply again, so we can talk you through where you've fallen down.
John, could I ask you to say a few words about Jerwood Charitable Foundation as a funder that's keen to fund Northern Ireland, hasn't yet at all?
Not
or not in your
history,
knowledge?
Not my experience. So our remit is to fund the professional development of artists who have completed their formal education. And we proactively look for projects that give them time and space to make new work and to experiment. So not necessarily production costs, it's a bit well before that. How do you make exciting new work? And broadly speaking, that's split into professional development opportunities, say mentorship program or research and development, There's also some commissioning work as well that we do. So that's broadly how we work.
Okay. And I mean, I know there's a number of people who will be seeing John later on, so there's sort of like 10 minutes to develop the relationship with John. How can we maintain the working relationship?
Do you mean from an initial conversation, or?
Yeah, or are there more initiatives that ACF could do, or Arts and Business? Is there more of this type of thing? Do you think, or once you go from here, will you be able to pick it up then independently and individually?
I mean, we're a very small team. We give roughly £1 million a year away, and there's just 2 of us who are coordinating that and picking up the new projects. And it's structured like that, so we can devote as much resource as possible to grant making, which is why we exist. But of course that means that we're quite stretched, and we pick up conversations that we can, and we do like to have that personal contact, especially when developing new projects that fit within our priorities. I think above all, we want you to excite us about a potential project, and getting us on board and excited about it is the best way to start to access our grant making.
The flight, a lot of these guys are getting the same flight back. Actually, it's going to be buzz and excitement and energy and enthusiasm, isn't it? Miriam, similarly, how all things dance, isn't it?
It's
year?
music.
Music
this year. We danced last year, next year theatre. So we have a 3-year cycle of grant giving. We're funded, unlike Children in Need who have an appeal night. If you're watching The Voice on Saturday night, please vote, because 10p from every phone call goes to the Performing Arts Fund, and that's how we exist. It's shows like Strictly. We don't ask for money anywhere else. And we use that money, we give about £500,000 a year to support 2 different strands. One is for community projects, so up to £5,000 for training, development, trying something ambitious, up to £10,000 to commission new work. That launches from community music on the 21st of May, so you'll have a time to start thinking about it now. And then we also run a fellowship scheme, so to support emerging musicians, composers, conductors, producers, programmers, and that launches in August, and that's £10,000 to the organisation. So the organisation applies to host a fellowship. All of the information, it's via the website, is the best thing to do. I have brought some handouts and I have my business cards, so I will give them to everybody here, but bear with me if I don't get back to you straight away. But really look at our website, and I think it was interesting is to look at what we funded before is a really good way of seeing. And what John was talking about is the personality of the organisation. You'll see we're very grassroots, very community, lots of choirs, brass bands, that kind of really on the ground local groups. So have a look and see whether you can fit, you feel that that's the right fit for you, because quite often we can really recognise an application where somebody's trying to shoehorn a project into fit because there's funding to do that project. So, it's not worth, yourselves, that sending it on a wing and a prayer, hoping that it'll suddenly fit because we've got a shortfall, because that never wouldn't happen. We just wouldn't give the money if that was the case.
Yeah, a number of funders have said at other events before, they're highly experienced in this. They can see straight through that, immediately. So you have to take, as Emer said, be honest with yourselves. If you're not entirely comfortable with it yourself, that it fits. Because clearly with capital funding, there's another issue about timescale decision making and timescale for implementation. Would you like to reflect on that?
Yes, timescales I suppose is a tricky one, because particularly when you're not talking about capital, the nature of projects is often you need the money in a fairly short timescale, but we as funders need a fairly lengthy period to do the assessment that we feel is appropriate. And I think that's really fundamental, because our grant funding is only as good as the decision-making processes that back it up. So we need enough time internally to assess applications. Some of us, like Wolfson, send applications out to expert review, and that takes time, partly because no one replies and we ask them to, so we have to chase them. But we then have, some of us have multiple panel meetings, so we have one expert panel that will advise a full trustee meeting further down the line. And it comes back to the key issue that's come up actually around resources, and we're all here to give money away, essentially, and so we're trying to restrict the overhead costs, as you will try to as well. And so we can only have so many staff working on these applications, and if we have deadlines at various points through the year rather than an ongoing process, we might be inundated with hundreds at any one time. And so it does take us quite a bit of time to give them the care and attention that I think they need. But I can see that this does create an issue, because you, when you're seeking funds, are looking for a fairly quick process, but hopefully you'll understand that to ensure that the best projects get funded, we need to take a little bit of time over it. We do look at ways we can speed things up, but I'm conscious that Wolfson, we are pretty lengthy. It can be 5 months or so between application and decision. But capital, of course, does raise some issues about needing to go through a lot of processes in terms of the various requirements.
I just want to comment on their own approaches to the time for processing applications.
Yeah, just like yourselves, we have 1.5 people, so it is we're part-time. So we do have a limited, just to say anybody who wants to speak to us, we're very, very open, and we always would invite people in and have a pre-application chat. In terms of timings, we meet 5 times a year, but our turnaround does tend to be very fast. And in terms of getting the application, we do ask that people don't exceed that, but we will certainly take a small wheelbarrow of additional information, and we'll write that up for you, and we'll try and get that passion. Totally agree with Sandara in the passion when people come to the meeting. If you don't believe in your project, it will be very difficult to convince us in that sense as well. And there are things that we won't support. But timing is crucial, because our turnaround, like most of the foundations, is very fast to get it to committee, to get it to the assessment, and to get those papers all collated and everything. So the more you can do, I suppose, in making sure that the application is right, because invariably we go back to most organisations that there's something missing, and maybe some other foundations aren't able to do that. But because we're all local, we'll phone you and say something's missing. We ask you to get it in a week before so that we can actually do that. But that tends to be mostly in around the finance, or maybe dates wrong, because we don't fund retrospectively. So if you put a date in before after the meeting time, then you're initially running yourselves out with one small point.
Okay, 5 minutes more, right? So any specific issues? And then Emer.
Sorry, I know, John, you said in terms of your presentation, in terms of let's not focus too much on the negative in terms of the Northern Ireland perspective. And I just wonder if there is a difference between the big national funder, the large-scale funders like ACNI or Paul Hamlin, who have funded work in Northern Ireland and have an understanding that there is a slight structural difference here. Because I know certainly my organisation has had very recent experience of having been funded by 2 small national funders, coming over for an evaluation visit and being totally mesmerised by the difference between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. So how do you get across that, if an organisation doesn't have on-the-ground experience in Northern Ireland, how do you get across that without playing the victim, there is a slight difference?
I mean, I think what you will see at the moment, what happens, and this is a big generalisation, but regularly what we see across Northern Ireland applications is need, kind of half a page on need, and slipping back and dissidence, and we're really deprived, and etc. etc. And then people will say yes, and then this is what we propose to do. And I think what needs to happen is that it needs to be a bit more sophisticated than that. It needs to weave in, in a more oblique, if you like, way, the way in which the work that we're doing addresses a number of issues, one or more of which might be uniquely specific to the situation in Northern Ireland, but not kind of have these block capitals saying that, you know, we're a post-conflict society and there's all sorts of issues which lead on from that, and that's not to minimise in a million years kind of that's the case, but I suspect that you and 100 other applications are saying exactly the same thing, and trusts and foundations get weary of a single narrative, and it actually starts to strangle the uniqueness of the project, and I think that's the problem. The needs start to overshadow the solutions. So it's about weaving in a more sophisticated, imaginative way that the answers that you've got are ones that suit the unique situation, unique circumstances of this place.
But I think it's a very valid point. I think it's part of developing the relationship, the understanding that, you know, even though John has got a sort of better understanding of the local environment than maybe others, so you just have to play that, and that absolutely then minimises, you know, by not having the boilerplate application that goes on. Emer?
My question's about scale and risk. I think for those organisations that receive statutory funding, quite often it's about maintaining the status quo, despite the fact that those are the funders that actually know you really well. And so when we go to Trust and Foundations, it's about how do we get that pitch right that's greater than that really small scale project, that's not about a big capital project, that's about those really innovative and quite risky projects, and that you're trying to do something different, or it's a prototype, or it's a pilot. How do you develop that relationship so that yes, there's your track record, but actually you're asking somebody to fund something that in a way is quite risky?
Can I take that?
Yeah.
Because I think
Please go ahead.
Paul Hammond is probably known for maybe being less risk averse than other funders, and it is a very fine balance. I think it would be fair to say that often the projects that we're interested in is the ones where people are talking about a step change, taking the organisation to a different level, or doing kind of work that they haven't done before, which in itself has already an element of risk in it. And so I think from our point of view, we're interested in hearing that kind of imaginative thinking, but backed up with evidence of why you think you were able to do that, and why you're well placed to do it. And then I think what comes into play there is showing a real understanding of what other people are doing. I don't know, maybe it was you when you gave your presentation, you said it's not always about showing what people 5 miles down the road are doing. But I find myself often asking exactly that question, maybe not 5 miles down the road, maybe a larger context, but it is about showing the knowledge of where you as an organisation fit in to what you consider your playing field. Either that can be the art form, it can be a geographical area. So it's about not just saying this is us and this is what we are doing and this is what we want to do and it's all very new, but also relating it to what other people are doing.
Can I add as well that, I mean, we quite often fund people for a core cost, and then in another relation, they'll come back to us and we'll do a project because they're looking at a risky piece of work that they want to pilot or test out. And so there's a different sort of types of grants that we can make. The relationship can take a different way of working out. And I'd also say, like Dorothy, we are interested in risk, and we are interested in people testing new models and building new ways of working, new practice is something we're very interested in. But what I would put alongside that, which also echoes Dorothy's, is that what we're also looking for then is if you have got the new model and if you have worked it out, how do you then disseminate that? How does that help the whole sector? Because I think, particularly in the arts funding, we're really interested in the future of the sector, the infrastructure, how it keeps growing and renewing itself. And so if someone has found a piece of new practice and they're prepared to take the risk to do that, then we'd be interested, but we're also interested in how that then helps everybody else as well.
And importantly, I think you agree that the contextual horizon,
absolutely,
it has to be UK-wide as far as you're concerned, or further afield, not
just for your own organisation.
Any more issues from the floor? What about the gaps? What would you like to see? What can you not get funding? And I know some people did answer saying just can't get funding for this type of work.
Can I just ask a general question?
Sorry?
Can I just ask a general question?
Yes, yeah.
Catherine Calvin from the Grand Opera House. I'm filling out an application at the minute. It's not for any of the organisations that are here, and it's not something that I normally do. Usually applying to foundations sits with another department in our organisation, so this will be the first time for me. One of the questions that I'm asked is how do I justify on paper the application for funding when I also have to prove the project sustainability? So if the project if we are able to sustain the project ourselves without funding, and it will continue without the funding from the organisation, then how do I justify the application? How do I justify the need?
I think you're looking at phases here. When you ask for support, then that is for a certain time. So we would appreciate that for that time it isn't sustainable yet, because otherwise you wouldn't be coming to us. But what you need to demonstrate is your thinking of what's next. Because we wouldn't be interested in pouring money down something which then, when the funding period is over, there's nothing in place. So the what next is what you need to show, that you are thinking about what other sources of funding or how structurally things would have changed by the funding we give now, that it then can carry on.
And I think it's about demonstrating the impact you hope our funding will have, as well as the project overall, but also about what difference us giving you a grant at this stage will make. So explaining that, because obviously we're small, and I know we've given a grant to you guys before, but it was part, I think, of a larger thing.
It's actually to replace.
Okay. Yes.
You're supporting a different.
Yeah. Yes, it was a theatre thing that we did 2 years ago, or last year. Yeah. So because, like I said before, our grants are quite small, and we're quite happy to be the first, like the seed funder of something, you know, so you get 5k from us and then you can get match funding from somebody else, but you need to explain your thinking, like Dorothy was saying, you know, where do we fit in the picture of where you see this going? Okay. Yeah.
Can I add to that? It may be around needing the investment initially when it's in its risky stage and it's unproven, and you can make the case that if this works like we think it will, we will then be able to attract all these people who will be keen to fund it, whether that be private individuals or statutory funders. But you need someone to back the risky element or the less exciting element, whatever it is, the sort of setup. And that's very much what we like to do as Trusts and Foundations, is to allow an organisation to increase its capacity to move forward, whether that be through a new project or through a new building or whatever it happens to be.
Jim, you want to say something like that?
I'm just conscious that we have all been experiencing the horror of peace talk in applications, and that's what groups have suffered in terms of how to get the peace funding speak out in applications. So hopefully we're emerging from that horribleness of 10 years of peace funding. But James, you did mention what was needed in funding. I'm sure that a lot of the arts organisations are doing excellent work in their own areas, but I'm always looking for, in the Fermanagh Trust, what is the arts organisation making connections with? Are they making connections with their neighbours across the county? For example, I know a project in Fermanagh are making connections. They have an Anglo-Irish programme and they have an international programme. And that's where there's need for monies, to make connections with people that are into arts but in different countries, and to either help groups experience what is going on in another country, or else to get some resources to bring in parallel organisations into Fermanagh, for example. But there is a need for that, to learn beyond the silo pit of your own backyard. You can't underestimate the value that is for good arts activity by bringing in parallel organisations from other countries. It really is an education in itself.
I mean, I think that that's really good and positive, but I think sometimes that people can underestimate that making and maintaining connections actually has a major resourcing implication.
Absolutely.
And it's one thing to fund the project, but it is another thing to actually fund the time that it goes in to maintaining those relationships, when most of our time just has to go in to delivering it to our direct beneficiary.
I only know too well.
Just wondering how the panel feels about current context in terms of the recession and the greater demands on public funds. I know that you said in your presentation, John, about deficit funding, but if trusts and foundations are to support infrastructure as much as possible, at the minute infrastructures are under incredible pressure and will be for the next, well, let's not get too negative about it, for the foreseeable future anyway. So that more and more often arts organisations do require support because they are funded to deficit. If we are going to maintain the level of networks and infrastructure that they have, how do organisations feel about that?
Who wants to come back on that? I mean, I think there is a fair understanding of the environment, all right, but the point was also made that it's also sort of counterintuitively seeing a fall in the number of applications. So, you know, how do we get over that conundrum of filling the gap that exists? You know, you're experiencing the fall and yet you still want to be progressive. Comments?
Well, I think something like this, where we get a chance to really show what it is we're looking for, is important, so it doesn't waste people's time in doing loads of applications to loads of foundations just because there's a possibility you may get some money at the end of it. But I think as a sector, you need to advocate for what it is you need to the trusts and foundations. So we have our funding priorities and we set, this is our 3-year strategy of how we're going to fund things. But and that's responding to what we anecdotally hear or whether we do research or whatever. So as a sector, maybe being more vocal about saying the real issues for us are A, B, C, D. These are, like James was saying, maybe it's the mid-term, you know, not the huge capital projects, not the small individual projects, but the core funding, you know, having a voice maybe and saying those things to us, so then we can take them to our boards and say, yes, it's great, but this is what people are asking for. Yeah.
So, certainly as far as, you know, information flows to and fro, you know, I'm very happy to act as a, you know, conduit through to ACF members to help develop that collective understanding of the context. So, you know, whatever briefings can come through, I can get them out to the network, and I know they're keen to learn. Right, Mary, would you just like to sum up before lunch, and then we'll move into later one-to-ones?
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, that's actually really interesting action that's just come out of that, because James is representing SEF and has already been talking to us as arts business as a kind of voice for yourselves. So that would be something that we could try and collectively lobby the trust through SEF, but what the big issues are for the sector in Northern Ireland. We could probably keep talking all afternoon, and the good news is that a lot of you can still do that on a one-to-one with some of the trusts. Just to let you know what's going to happen next. Brona and Tanya have been frantically scribing away, and we've had a camera in the corner videoing this, which we're going to make a kind of video podcast of, but it'll go on our website and we'll get it out to everybody that's been here today. As I say, all of the discussion that we've had from yourselves and with the panel is going to inform a toolkit that we're working on with James and SEF. That will also use some of the feedback we got from the survey. We'll distill all that into a toolkit that will hopefully be useful for you to kind of wrap up a lot of the points really made today. So this is kind of the start of that, really. Lunch is going to be served next door. I know in the back of all your packs, anybody that's booked a surgery should have a time of that in their pack. As I say, we're going to reconfigure this room, so all the chairs will be gone. There'll just be a table for each trust around the edge of the room at speed dating. You've only got 10 minutes with the trust. Obviously, what you're going to be able to achieve in that is the start of that relationship that we talked about. It's really just a chance to kind of connect with the trust, sense check the project that you've got in mind, if you have a project in mind, the eligibility and how it initially fits. And then really it'll be about following up with that trust afterwards. So it's only 10 minutes. There's a lot of people that we have to get through. We really tried to get it, as many people as we possibly could. The guys have flights to get later on, so when you hear a very loud bell in your ear, that means please do move on and let the next person hear you come along. I'd just like to do a few thank yous before we break up, because I want to give the chance to do that again. Firstly, thank you to yourselves for coming and participating so well, because it wouldn't have worked if we hadn't had the dialogue, and also the survey as well. I do appreciate it, and hopefully you felt that it has informed some of the discussion today. Obviously, thank you to all representatives from the trusts that have taken the time to travel over today, and the ones that have come from Northern Ireland as well. We really, really appreciate that. I'd like to thank James, as I say, for getting the trusts to come here today and to be that liaison point with them. In my team, particularly Bruna and Susan, have put a huge amount of work into the organisation of this. Obviously Una has put a huge amount of time into the survey as well, and the work's not done in that. We're still putting that all together. So thank you. As I said, the next stage is next door for lunch. Then back in here for the time that's on your surgery, and hopefully you'll get some time to enjoy this wonderful building as well. So thank you very much indeed.